Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to check out an airsoft gun that recently hit the US market through Evike Manufacturing Group. Admittedly, this was a bit of an impulse buy, but I'd also been on the lookout for something pretty close to this style rifle. This is the EMG M16A1, the Vietnam era rifle. Today we're going to check this out, and I'm going to tell you why I'm still pretty mixed on this rifle. I picked this up for two reasons. One, it was an impulse buy, and two, I've wanted to create a particular Vietnam loadout for a while. Lately, there just haven't been a lot of Vietnam era options out there as far as airsoft guns go. The fact that this came out, it was kind of serendipitous into something I was looking for at the time. And I'll tell you, I'm glad I got the gun, but if I were a new player that bought this and just wanted to run it as is, out of the box, no work done to it, I'm not sure I would have been very happy with it. Before I get too crazy in depth with the gun, let's check out everything it comes with. You get a 200 round mid-capacity magazine, which is rather nice. You can get high caps of these, but I find like they're kind of pointless. The mid-cap, I think, is definitely a better way to go, especially in this small package. A bag of BBs, I'd say throw these out. They're probably not worth using. A little EMG card that says, hey, I bought the gun and I've got a warranty on it, so cool. Lastly, a kind of cruddy instruction manual. Most of it's in Chinese and the English isn't great in it. And it's more meant for other airsoft guns in particular, not this specific M16A1. So it's kind of a more generalized instruction manual. If you're new to airsoft and you're just getting to know your airsoft gun, I'd probably look up a guide online. This really isn't gonna help a whole lot. You can tell just by looking at the gun that it is made by Cyma. And that's not a bad thing. I think Cyma is a fantastic company. I really do enjoy a lot of their work, and they've got a good price point on most of their guns. The biggest reason I bought it, I think, was for the licensing. The Colt logo on here and the engraving, the laser engraving, is really excellent. And of course, the other thing here, the fact that the mag catch has no fencing. That was a big thing for me, because there's plenty of models out there where you can get versions, even metal body ones, that have the fencing around it, but I want something a little more realistic. And given this isn't the perfect replica of this model, but this is one of the few out there that did not have this that you can get pretty readily. As always, I'll start with the back of the gun and move my way forward. The back cap of the gun is rubberized, and it's kind of nice. It grips your shoulder well. It's got a ribbing to it, and I do like it. And I will say that the gun does come with sling loops on the front and back, but they're so wobbly and noisy that I just punch the pins out. So you do get a sling loop on the stock and on the triangle front sight, but I have removed those. And you can see I still got the little blue tag from playing at Nighthawk Airsoft with this. I'm just going to leave that because this is actually a rather fun gun after a little bit of work to it. Installing the battery in the M16A1 stock is a little more work than your normal M16 stock with a trap door. You do have to take a flathead to this, kind of loosen it a little bit and swivel it to the side. This locks in very oddly, so getting it back on takes a little bit of work, but you do get quite a bit of battery storage in your stock. You do get a Dean's connector already installed on this, which is a definitely nice touch on this gun. I don't like having to install a Dean's connector on every single gun I get. The receiver is probably what most people are going to buy this gun for, at least for the most part. You do get the really, really nice Colt logos here. Again, one of the reasons I bought the airsoft gun. Underneath the dust cover, you do have your hop-up assembly. I'll talk more about this when I get to the internals of the gun, but it is a rotary style hop, and it is pretty tough to turn. You do have a working bolt catch, which can be released by hitting the bolt catch or release little paddle on the opposite side of the gun. This is probably just a one-off thing, but the selector, when you go from safe to semi, it's pretty normal feeling, but when you go to semi to full auto, it's rather tight, which I found a little odd. I'm not sure why that is. The pistol grip is their original A1 style, so it doesn't have the little finger groove there, which I really like. I much prefer this to the A2 style grip. I do wish, though, that the screw holes in here had brass or metal inserts. It just screws into plastics, so I'm hoping this one lasts for a while, because I don't really see these style grips too often on the market. The biggest flaw in this, as far as being era authentic, is the lower receiver here, unfortunately, where it meets the stock. There's reinforcement here where kind of the newer models would have reinforcement. The original one was a little more just basic, I guess, and didn't have this this thicker section here. So that's where it departs in realism there, but for the most part, this gun is fairly accurate. The carry handle on the gun is attached, which is actually something I really like. Just having it built in, just fewer things there. You don't have the knobs on the sides or the pick rail. It's just less hardware. I do like the simplicity of it. And the rear sight is adjustable for simply windage. The front sight is where you have your elevation. I'm really glad they got the correct delta ring on here. It is flat instead of being tapered, and it is definitely a nice touch. It does have a sufficiently strong spring behind it to keep the handguard fairly in place, but it does have a little bit of wobble. And speaking of the handguard, it's triangular, as you expect with this gun. It's not the most comfortable in the world, but I do like it still. It fits the era. It works fine for me. I like to hold it up front a little bit because it's skinnier, but keep in mind, it is plasticky. You really do get that sound and that feel from it. There's not a lot of texture on it. It just doesn't feel like the greatest quality. On the front end, you do get a really skinny pencil-esque barrel. Accurate to the real thing, exactly what I wanted. And then the flash hider was interesting. It came with a big old orange plastic cap that was pinned in place. Thankfully not glued, so there wasn't any residue. But I basically had to break that off, and there's a little pinhole in one of the prongs from it, but what can you do? The metal flash hider is actually really nice. It adds some realism to it, and it looks really good as well. The most interesting part of this review, I think by far, is the internals of the gun. Let's go ahead and put this gun on the tech table and take it apart. All right, we've got the gun apart here on the tech table. We're gonna check out the main three components, which of course the hop-up and barrel, the motor, and the platinum Cyma gearbox. The hop-up is a one-piece metal rotary style hop-up. It does have a fairly large heavy spring in the front to keep the barrel and hop-up against your gearbox and sealed well. The rotary barrel here is pretty stiff. The click is reasonably positive, but there's no way this is gonna unwind while you're shooting. It is extremely stiff. Actually, to adjust it, you're probably gonna bend a nail back. I'd recommend using a flathead screwdriver or your car keys if you have those on hand on the field. It's kind of nice. They actually do have a little indicator here for down as hop. There's a lot of hop-ups out there that simply don't have any kind of reference or indicator, and you have to kind of guess sometimes at which direction is more hop or less hop. So that is a nice touch. The motor is reasonably torquey, like actually fairly torquey considering. The only downside to it really is it needs a little bit of shim job. It's got a little bit of wiggle here. Not a huge deal, not a ton, but definitely noticeable. It does use a D-type pinion, so if you guys need to replace it, those are readily available. The gearbox is Cyma's QBS gearbox. It does have their quick change spring system. The spring guide actually threads into the back of the body, not the gearbox. So I'm curious to see if that's going to be a durable system or not. It does have an O-ring on the back here, which is interesting to lock it in place. It's already starting to split, actually, unfortunately, so I might have to replace that or perhaps glue it in place. I'm not sure which. The spring, since we've already got this out of the gearbox without having to disassemble it, is right around an M115 or M120. It's a fairly heavy spring. Something I did notice, though, it is a non-linear spring, and the coils are tighter at the front. I was always taught when teching to put the tightly coiled section at the back, but unfortunately, the coils are a little too tight, and it kind of gets stuck on the spring guide there. So unfortunately, I have to leave the linear section on the back there. Now, some things to point out about the gearbox here. It does have a radiused front, which is actually really nice, and it is somewhat reinforced there, so I'm hoping to get some fairly good durability out of the shell. It does use 8mm bearings. The other side of the gearbox is a little cutout for tripping the anti-reversal latch, so if you need to do that to decycle the gears and spring, you can very easily do that. All right, I've got all the screws out of the gearbox. Let's go ahead and pop it open here. Might need a little bit of coaxing to open up here. Looks like the cylinder head is a little stuck. There we go. Plenty of blue grease painted on everywhere. You can see why people like to call this the blue gearbox. Definitely fits that notion. First off, let's take a look at the compression system, then we can look at the mechanics and the electronics, because those are all actually fairly unique. Air seal's pretty good after you get it going there. It's not perfect, but it's good. You get a little bit of leakage there. It's probably from the nozzle would be my guess. The nozzle is just a polycarb plastic nozzle, no O-ring, which is a little surprising that all these upgrades are in here and there's no upgraded O-ring nozzle, which is a little disappointing. And even without the nozzle, the air seal is pretty close to perfect. It is like really, really close, but the cylinder head kind of wants to slip out a little bit because it seems to have been lubricated, and it probably should have been dry because it's not a static O-ring. But despite that, it is a 2 O-ringed aluminum cylinder head. It's pretty light, which is nice. It is fairly lubricated, which really isn't necessary. The pad on it seems to want to rotate, and let's see. It's probably just stuck in there, kind of like the G and P cylinder heads. I'm gonna have to glue that in because I like these to be very stationary and not move. And just in case, I don't want it to come out. The cylinder, the Type 0, it's an aluminum cylinder, no port, works just fine, exactly what you need for that longer barrel. It does have a metal tooth rack here. They're probably reasonably decent quality steel teeth there. And the second to last tooth is not removed. It's a little shaved down, just a hair. So I'm probably just gonna remove that and do some AOE correction on there. This is an aluminum ported silent piston head, which is rather nice. You really don't see these in stock airsoft guns very often anymore. I feel like you used to with some of the collaboration projects like 10 years ago, but nowadays you really don't. And it does have bearings in the back, which is rather nice. Additionally, with the piston head, the damper on the front of it, which is why they call it a silent piston head, comes right off. So this does need to be glued down. It's kind of held in place by a little spoke here and a ring. Honestly, it doesn't work that well, so I would strongly recommend gluing this down because it just comes off that easily. Finally, the tappet plate is rather flexible. I will note that there are cuts in the front of it to match the thicker sections of reinforcement in the front of the gearbox, so it is one of these special tappet plates. Something I am extremely pleased about and rather surprised, this is actually a first in any Cyma gun that I've opened up, is the shimming is spot on. The axial movement is close as you can get it to 0 on each of the gears. I'm spreading grease around just by touching the gearbox. That's how much grease I've had to handle with this one. And I can't fault the shimming at all. It is really pleasant to see a gun well shimmed out of the box, not having to worry about it at all. The trigger system here is a little bit different. Cyma started using their interesting little MOSFET, and the trigger essentially hits this small micro switch, and you can hear a small click there. It is a very small micro switch actually, and it has unusually a large little capacitor there. So I'm no electrical expert. I've heard very mixed things about these little MOSFETs. I've heard some people say they fail quickly. I've heard some people say they're fantastic. I'm curious to see how long this lasts as far as durability goes. The gears are not what I quite expected. I figured they'd be the kind of SHS look-alike gears, and in fact, I'm pretty sure they are SHS gears. This is a 12-to-1 SHS gear, and this is a 13-to-1 that came in the gun. They're pretty much identical, so I'm pretty sure EMG or Cyma, whichever, sourced these from SHS, which is not a big deal. They're fine gears. But I did notice that the sector gear actually has, instead of the normal 15 teeth, only 12 teeth, which is a little surprising for a gun that has nearly a 500mm barrel. Generally, you'd want that extra cylinder capacity to lift heavy BBs or, just even function as well as you'd really like it to. So until I take this out on the field, I'm really not going to know how this functions exactly. I'm really tempted to put just a standard gear set in here with 15 teeth. But the problem there is I was breaking this down a little bit more and trying some things, and unfortunately the piston head ends up being the problem. When it gets to the last tooth here, it simply can't go back any farther because it's hitting the back of the cylinder window, which is really not a good thing. On the 12-tooth sector, you're never going to have this because it's not being pulled back all the way, but if you put a standard 15-tooth sector in here like this, it's not going to work. Essentially, the problem with the piston head is there's no space like you'd normally have, and you can really see the difference. This one sits closer to the piston head, or the piston, than your normal piston head. So, if I want to put a standard 15-2 sector in there, I need to swap the piston head. Another unfortunate fact is I can't get the piston head off the piston. It is so tight down or glued or Loctited, I'm not sure. I have tried every tool and option at my disposal. The only thing I can do, unfortunately, is drill out the back of the screw that holds the piston head on and remove it that way. Unfortunately, the screw for the piston head was either glued in or had so much Loctite on it that I still can't even get it out with having drilled it out. I took pliers to it and vice gripped it, and this screw just won't come out. So from the sample size of one, it looks like if for some reason your piston failed or something ever went wrong with your piston head, you would unfortunately have to replace both. Given they're not terribly expensive, it is something to note. I'm still glad I bought the Airsoft gun. Definitely at the full price point, I don't think it's worth it. If you're gonna buy it, I'd say wait till it's on sale and go that route. You're saving a little bit more money there. I think it's definitely more worth it at that point. But if you're not terribly technically inclined with your Airsoft gun, you may want to think twice. It's probably better suited to the XM1-77, so I'm pretty much sure that has more or less the same internals in it. And with the short-stroked gears, it's more suited to a shorter barrel. But having a full-length M16 barrel with short-stroked gears doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not efficient, you're losing air volume, and you're probably losing range, and definitely power. This gun chronoed right about 350 feet per second when I got it, which was well below the 370 to 400 advertised speed, which was pretty disappointing. On top of that, I had feeding issues. About every other round fed on full auto, and that was on a 7.4 volt, so that's kind of disappointing. What I did was install G&G standard gears from an old combat machine. They're solid, they work well, and they're just good quality. Those shimmed really well, and a sector chip got this gun feeding much, much better. But as mentioned before, unfortunately, I did have to install some other things. I did, for durability, install some Lonex 8mm bushings, just random parts I had sitting around. I actually didn't put any extra money into this gun. It's all things I had sitting around in boxes. That and a Lonex silent piston head. It was a little thicker, so it did correct the AOE a little bit better. I did put a new bucking on this gun. The original bucking was okay. I'm not a big fan of Cyma stock buckings. It was a Mad Bull orange I had sitting around in my parts box, and that alone gave me a boost of 10 FPS. With everything installed in the gun that really needed to be, as far as making it work with a 15-2 sector, which is your really standard stuff in most Airsoft guns, the gun shot a whopping 430 feet per second, which was just awesome. The spring in here is very much a 120 and should be able to get you much higher FPS than 350. Taking those 3 teeth off there and helping the airspeed a little bit really went a long, long way to getting this gun to perform much, much better. Now, don't worry, when I took it out to Nighthawk, I put a different spring in here, had it shooting a little bit softer, so it was totally field legal. But even with that, the gun shot with a 3.2 and a handful of my upgrades, like 200 feet. It performed really well. I was hitting people at a great distance with fairly good accuracy. So with some upgrades and a little bit of work, I was really happy with the gun. Stock, I was quite a bit less impressed. But the one thing that really did impress me about the gun stock was the trigger response. I just hooked up a big 3000 milliamp hour 7.4 to it, which is kind of my test battery, and the trigger response on semi was instant. I have never had a gun be that responsive ever to any battery. It was really nice. It's probably a combination of the short stroking, the MOSFET, the Dean's connector, really everything plays into that. And it was really, really nice to get that out of the box. This gun is really geared toward rate of fire. With all the upgrades in there, the speed gears, the short stroked sector gear, which is just unusual for an Airsoft gun stock, you're supposed to be able to get about 28 rounds per second on an 11.1 with this gun, which makes sense. But is it the most efficient gun? No. You're giving up efficiency for rate of fire, and I'm not sure that's a great way to go. I'd be much happier running 15 rounds a second on this gun and having it perform much more efficiently and effectively on the field than having, say, a whopping rate of fire. Ultimately, I'm going to give this gun kind of a lackluster grade. I'm going to give it a 6. As it is, it's mixed. From a text perspective, it needs work. From an out-of-the-box perspective, if you're just buying it because it's got a lot of cool upgrades in it and the new Cyma Platinum gearbox, it's pretty solid for the most part, just not the most efficient. After a handful of upgrades and some work, I would give this gun a 9. It just needs some changes. So I'll let you guys make up your mind on this one. This is a mixed one for me. I'm really happy with it after putting some work into it, but stock, I was pretty disappointed in it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. This was kind of an odd gun to review, especially with having reviewed a lot of nice products lately. I feel like this one was kind of a little weird. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next review.